Thank you, Canada, for having me here. It's my first trip to Canada, so hopefully I will not leave you with an entirely unpleasant impression. So I'll sort of start out and just say that, I'll just say thanks to Hannah and Jerry here who invited me to come out here on this trip. It's been a few years since I've done speaking directly, but I do keep in touch with many activists who work on this issue and have continued to work on various projects over the years and have always been very happy to do so. It's good to see a good crowd out here. Thank you guys for coming out in this cold evening downtown. As Hannah said, a number of years back, I was living in Albuquerque, New Mexico in 2002, and bit of a, call it a bohemian lifestyle. I was a musician, I was a sustainable agriculturalist, as well as a student of naturopathic medicine. Wait, let me, can you hear? Oh, there we go. All right, I'll just have to speak directly into the microphone. Okay, so, what's this one?
All right. Try that. That should be better.
All right, how's that? All right, I'll sort of stay close to the microphone. So as Hannah alluded to, in 2002, I was living in New Mexico, where I was doing a variety of activities, working in sustainable agriculture, music, as well as some sort of naturopathic medicinal things, as well as being a political activist, which I had been involved with for many years on many different issues, human rights, environmental policy, and a number of things. And the issue of Palestine, it's funny, people always ask, why Palestine, both in a positive and a negative sense, because for, I think, particularly Palestinians, it's very a forgotten issue off the radar. And so they're very intrigued as to how a person like me came to not only be interested in the issue and understand the issue, but take a direct interest and role in the issue. And there's no one moment or event that I can point to other than just being a very curious person throughout life, being interested in politics, taking an active interest, both as a person, a professional, and eventually, gradually moving into activism. It wasn't an overnight, sensation. I didn't read something in the newspaper one day and suddenly, boom, you're an activist. It was a very gradual process, a process nurtured by many great people I met, experienced longtime activists working on a range of issues, who showed me that there was sort of an alternative community and an alternative way of doing things outside of the sort of traditional outlets of the government, of the media. Because I'd read the news stories about Israel and Palestine for years and years as a young person growing up. My father was a U.S. naval officer, so I was always very conscious of military and conflicts, because there was always the possibility that perhaps it could directly affect my family. And so it was always something on my mind, always something I paid attention to. And by the time the Intifada starting in the 2000s, I was able to sort of reach out to people who were, more connected to the issue and get a more direct sense of, some of the dynamics. And certainly as well as reading a lot of the great books that were out. I think Noam Chomsky's Fateful Triangle was a very influential work. Not so much for his position on the issue per se, but in the way he sort of exposed the bias that exists to this day in the media and amongst, particularly the American government. I can't speak to the Canadian government as well as Hannah can, but I'm sure there's similar dynamics. But it became very clear to me that with Palestine, it was a very sort of one-sided affair where you had a particular, call it a political, call it an ethnic community that was essentially disempowered entirely in their fate by by Israel, by America, and by its sort of their international sort of collaborators in Canada and Europe. So it felt very natural to go there and to travel and to witness what was going on. I went to some presentations by other ISM members and was very impressed with their work, and decided to take it upon myself to go there. I mean, certainly it was I didn't just sort of buy a ticket one day and show up. I reached out to all the members of the community I could to support me in that endeavor, and they did. They responded very positively. And it was a very powerful experience to go over there. And I went over there because, to me, as an American citizen, I think by and large, the American government is certainly not the only complicit party in what is going on in Israel, Palestine, however you want to name it. But they certainly have a very direct role, probably more responsible than anyone else. They are on the forefront. They are the vetoes in the UN, their official statements. They're essentially the bridge between Palestine and the world and what holds progress back. And so I felt it was very much, as a representative, essentially, of the United States government, it was what they call in political science a sort of act of public diplomacy, where when your government fails to sort of represent your views, it's entirely natural for you to take it upon yourself as a citizen, as a sort of representative of your own country, republic, or whatever, to take matters into your own hands and to try to provide information and education to the public in a way that the established institutions do not. And so that was the mission. That was the mission of the International Solidarity Movement. It was a movement of people willing and able, because not everyone is able to do something like go to Palestine and witness tanks running around and things like that. And it's not everyone's duty to do that. There's obviously a range of things people can do in those situations. But for me, it was the choice, and I felt very comfortable with it, and did up until the moment where I was targeted by the Israelis. It was a very immensely powerful experience being there. The sort of welcome that the Palestinian community gave to us, to me, was very inspiring. It really was. And I sort of went there on an open-ended timetable and ended up staying there for 3 months, and it was a very humbling experience, a very powerful experience, a very dark experience. It was a very terrible life for the people living there, for the people growing up there. Everyone had a story of watching a friend, a relative, being shot, being killed by the Israelis. It was just a terrible situation. And I felt very, justified in going over there and doing that. And so naturally, at the time, the Israeli government was not pleased with the International Solidarity Movement. They openly said so in the media, that we were essentially an obstacle, that we had to be removed, sort of leaving it open to, and if the military government is speaking it in public in that sense, they're speaking it amongst themselves, the military, the officers, the soldiers, certainly in a more direct sense. And after that, it became clear, after Rachel was killed, after I was shot, a British citizen, Tom Herndl, was shot shortly thereafter. Another British citizen, James Miller, a cameraman, was shot and killed shortly thereafter. There was a sort of spate of violent shootings / killings, and it became very clear that the Israelis were willing to pretty much take the gloves off and consider anyone who showed solidarity with the Palestinian people, that they would be treated likewise, that they would be treated accordingly, that the sort of savagery that they had up until then pretty much solely reserved for the local residents, would be extended to anyone who joined the local residents to sort of witness their life and try to broadcast that to the outside world. And so that's what happened. It was a direct shooting. It was an intent to kill. I spent 3 months in an Israeli hospital, spent 8 years in and out of an American hospital getting everything repaired. And the Israeli government has certainly, they continued thereafter to step up their efforts to prevent people from entering Palestine and witnessing. They became very aggressive about deportations, and just very aggressive in general about essentially censoring the day-to-day life of the Palestinian population out of the public eye. And certainly the US government and the US media, and to a larger extent the international government and media community, were more or less accepting and complicit with that. And so it became even more powerful for Palestine solidarity activists to find alternative ways to bring the message home, if you will. And there you have the BDS, the Boycott, Divestment, and Sanctions, ways to empower people to hold Israel accountable, essentially enact sanctions against Israel by public citizens in various ways. And I think it's a brilliant idea. I support it wholeheartedly, and I have been always encouraged by the successes and the efforts that people have had in the years since. The student movements at various universities, most recently at the University of California, San Diego, voting to divest from Israeli institutions. I think these are fantastic efforts that completely fly under the radar of certainly the American public, probably the Canadian public as well to a degree. So, for me, a lot of people always try to sort of, certainly with what the ISM did, the idea was to try to, when I left, I contacted local media outlets to get interest in the story, and some were sort of interested, but it was sort of, yeah, call us when you get back and we'll talk. And I think there's a certain aspect of credit to trying to use the existing institutions in a way, trying to lobby political officials, trying to get stories in the media. I'm always encouraging people who do that, but I think from my experience watching this issue over the years at various sort of levels of distance, I think it's essentially up to the public to take it into their own hands to sanction Israel and try to essentially dismantle the policy regime that they have. From my perspective, a lot of people will try to break down the debate and, is it a one-state solution, two-state? For me, I do not see any difference between Israel, the Palestinian Authority. I consider it one single policy regime that should be dismantled. And that's the perspective I try to put across. And so I think for individual citizens, there's no sort of lack of creativity that people can come up with, and I've seen no lack of creativity in the way people come up with. I downloaded this app to my phone today. It's called a boycott app, and you can scan barcodes, and for the products, it'll bring up information, whether it's, and in the case of Israel, whether it's made in a settlement, made in Israel, produced by Israel. And I think that's one of the most brilliant things I've ever seen. And it shows that, people are out there, that they are active, and they continue to do things. Because everybody always wants to sort of throw up their hands. That's always, this sort of defeatist response that, it's been going on forever, blah, blah, blah. There's nothing we can do. It's up to the governments, which is, it's just a poor excuse for, lack of responsibility and lack of action. And so there's various ways of looking at about how to sort of go about BDS from a local to an international level. And I think there's ways it can be done that you don't have to spend a lot of money. You don't have to fly across the world or buy a boat to do it, although I think those were fabulous ideas. They were very cool ideas. And they sort of served their purpose in a way. They got it into the media. And I think there can be a cumulative effect of different actions that produce a sort of sentiment that, because if you take the example of the US Congress, there is zero debate in the Congress about Palestine other than we support Israel. And that's kind of the accepted, I think, mentality. The public generally reflects the debates that go on in the media and the government. And if there's no sense of an allowance of diversity on a debate, then people will shut it off and just sort of tune it out and forget about it. And so I think one of the most crucial things that I think needs to happen, number one, is that there needs to be more political candidates for public office, whether in America, whether in Canada, who do support the issue. And I'm not talking about finding some guy who's got the credentials, the typical lawyer, banker, businessman type, who might be friendly to the issue. I think we need to flip that script and say, it doesn't matter if you're a student, if you're a banker, if you're a restaurant waiter, which I am currently. It's your entitlement to participate in your democracy. And so I think people need to take more advantage of that. And we've always seen these campaigns over the years to get out the vote, to get out the ballot. I think we need to get out the candidate. Because I don't care how many people go vote, it's not going to matter if they're choosing between two crap candidates who don't give a shit about the issue. So I think we need more political participation in a direct sense, to give people a sense that you don't have to be a certain income level or a certain education, achievement to be a representative of the public, because most of the public aren't those things. They hold all kinds of jobs. They hold or not. People that raise their kids. Are they not entitled to be a representative of the people? And so I think people need to feel more empowered and more confident that they can do that they can run for an office and get in and be a voice and do that. And I think if people do that, people feel more confident about voting and about participating in the political process, because it will be more democratic. There will be more voices, more opinions, more diversity in the discourse. And if there's more diversity in the discourse, what people are hearing, then there won't be those sort of barriers that I have to speak a certain way, I have to know a certain thing about this. Well, no, you can bring sort of any vantage point into it. So that's certainly one kind of idea that I certainly intend to promote going ahead. As Hannah mentioned, I'm a musical artist. I work with a band that may very well, sooner than later, be a national, internationally known music group. And I would certainly welcome the chance to use that as a vehicle to promote, to be political in the sense of promoting the boycott of Israel. There's a lot of music groups that have done so. Some do openly, some do not. Usually they'll say sort of, so-and-so band cancels performance in Israel, scheduling conflict, whatever. It's all a bit under the table. But not, some very well-known acts have been quite openly, Coldplay, Roger Waters, Santana, to name a few, openly stated that they would not play there, I believe, because they disagreed with the politics. So there's precedence in a lot of fields for people showing a boycott mentality, a divestment mentality. there's, with the Israeli economy, there's a lot of, I'd say, avenues that aren't necessarily accessible to people, a lot of military weaponry companies that you don't buy that stuff at the grocery store, so how do you boycott it? But it may very well be the case that your financial portfolio company may have investments in these companies. You know, your university may have investments in these companies. The churches which have divested from Israel is another bright spot that prove that you can be, that there's many ways to be active and creative about divesting or boycotting. And so there's really never any excuse for anyone to say, you know, I don't know how to participate, I can't participate. There's always a way. You just have to sort of, you know, look at your life and look at your circumstances and, you know, sort of scale the issue to your life and look at how it can impact you. So there's certain, you know, direct aspects like that. I think for people to, you know, and people ask me, well, sort of how do I, one of the guys in the band asked me once, you know, he's like, yeah, I sort of get it, but how do I present it to people who might not get it, you know, particularly people of a Christian background, you know, who are sort of, you know, indoctrinated, if you will, into the stories of the Bible and things like that. And for me, it just comes down to looking at it, you know, on a human level. You can divide, you know, this or any issue in any infinite number of identity sort of little categories and boxes. But at the end of the day, you're talking about human beings, savaging human beings under the, you know, basically a fictitious guise of, you know, some identity creation. And so that's sort of the essential point of it. I look at, you know, Israel it's a political regime. That's all it is. It's a movement of actors who have sort of solidified a certain control over a geography, including, you know, the West Bank and Gaza. I don't look at it in those terms. I don't look at it as two states. I look at it as one single regime, as I mentioned before. It is a Zionist regime. It is not a Jewish regime. It's, you know, call it Israeli regime if you want, but it's a single policy architecture, you know, very reminiscent of the South African apartheid, as well as the Jim Crow laws in America. And so there is precedent for ending these, you know, these sort of policy regimes that systematically discriminate. You know, there's no excuse in that sense that, you know, it's a century-old conflict, for example. You know, it's not going on forever. This is a modern political creation. The Zionist movement is in historical terms, relatively recent political creation. And so I think framing it in political terms, you know, human terms and then political terms, is sort of, for me, the easiest way to begin to translate it to people and to sort of break down any, you know, sort of knee-jerk kind of recapitulations of the typical media or government spiel that is always repeated. And I find it does work. I remember years ago when I was speaking and telling people about that, it does reach people. And they can sort of grasp it in a way that they will not feel quite as intimidated about presenting it to other people, of speaking with other people. Because a lot of it just comes down to, you know, I know a load of Jewish anti-Zionist activists, and many of them have been essentially shamed out of their families for being against Israel. And so, yeah, there's an immense pressure in various communities to sort of blindly accept these policies, and it's very difficult for people to step out and, you know, be a dissenter. And so it's whatever, we can do to create more comfort spaces for people to participate that. And I think BDS certainly allows for that. It allows for people to, you don't have to tell anybody that you're not going to go buy a SodaStream product. But if you're in the market for bubbly water, you can make that choice, and you can know you made that choice. And I'm sure sooner or later you'll meet people who made that choice as well. People will come to events like this, and they'll see people like me speaking, and it's a sort of chain reaction of events, of reaching people, on a very simple human level, to where there's not these sort of barriers and walls of, I don't understand the issue, I can't, I don't know enough about the issue. You don't need to know every fact in detail. I'm not sitting here reciting, Bill Clinton said this in 1992 and things like that. I appreciate people who are able to sort of recant facts like that, because they're interesting and useful. But I don't think it's essential to be a sort of Jeopardy wizard who can just name every little thing. It's not necessary. It's, not everybody can do that. Not everybody wants to do that. Not everybody feels like they need to start, their own master's program in, Arab studies tomorrow. But I think people can study the issue in a very easy way. There's plenty of books out there, plenty of websites. Start with the Canadian Palestine Association and go from there. They've got books outside. And so there's ways to reach people, and when I got into activism and went to Palestine and came back, it was certainly an education for my family, and it was an education for people I met all over the country who had never heard any of the things I was telling them. I went to places like Phoenix and Albuquerque and Seattle, and would talk to people who, had sort of sailed through life, sort of hearing all these stories, and maybe never had the time to properly be an activist about the issue. And then they get to an event like this, and they hear people like me speaking of boycotts and divestments and things like that, and of Zionism, and it's like a revelation. And so, keeping avenues for people to be involved, doing public events. I think a lot of people get scared about doing public events, putting on public events. They're afraid that they're going to be sort of targeted or, smeared. And it's a very real concern for a lot of people because there is a very fanatical sort of pro-Zionist kind of network out there dedicated solely to shutting down anything that whiffs of dissent on the issue. I think it's a very unique creation in my mind, a very sadistic one, frankly. And so it's, people will attack you on a personal level. They will. I've experienced it. Not necessarily physically, but certainly emotionally and intellectually. So it's not an easy issue to tackle. And so I think it's even more important for people who work on Palestine solidarity, who want to work on Palestine solidarity, to sort of band together and do things and do events and get to know one another and sort of learn dialogue with the ways that they can participate in the BDS movement. So how are we on time?
Almost done.
Okay. So I think just to sort of close things out, we've almost got a full room here. I see a range of ages, certainly I'm sure a range of professions, backgrounds, occupations. So there's always avenues for being politically participative, whether you actually walk out of here and say, wow, that's great, I should run for the city council. I never thought of that. Yeah, I'll do it. I mean, that's great, but that's not, certainly by no means the only way to do it. But I do think people need to feel more empowered about directly challenging the sort of political apparatus that keeps Palestine under, a very lethal occupation, and not feeling that you have to sit around and wait for anybody to tell you whether it's okay to support an issue, or to wait for some kind of congressional or parliamentary resolution to be confident in acting on the issue. So I don't know if anybody here is brand new to the issue. Maybe not. If you are, thanks for coming out here. I think you'll be very entertained and enlightened. But this is a good sign, Hannah put this event on, and sure enough, we've pretty much got a room full of people. So it proves that there's interest. It proves that people are curious, people are interested. Maybe there's someone here who hopes to God no one recognizes them, because they're stepping into it brand new. I've always found that there's always a sort of gradation of people from, guys that have been involved with it, Palestinians who've been born into it, down to people who are just getting into it. So nobody should ever feel that there's a sense of you have to, sort of like a video game, achieve a certain level of points before you can, do this or do that kind of activity. If everyone wants to take out their cars and shut down the highway and do a makeshift checkpoint, I'll be happy to join you. But there's a myriad of ways to support the BDS efforts. Whether it's hosting a speaker, starting an event, starting a web page, just tweeting about it, reading about it. Social media nowadays, there's a lot of creative ways to reach people. There are a lot of great films, a lot of great books. Writers like Omar Barghouti, Ali Ibn Nima, and who've put out recent works, and there's been works that go back, decades. So there's no shortage of information on the issue. I think accessing that information has always been a problem. I think the internet has certainly been a welcome relief in that sense of allowing a sort of alternative vehicle to present the information and give people sort of ways to dialogue and exchange information. But at the end of the day, it can't just be a sort of academic exercise. It has to be a personal issue. So whether it's, participating in events that perhaps the local, I guess, what do they call them, Arab Canadian associations may put on, and sort of, because I think that's a broader point that sort of captures the way that certainly the American government supports Israel, because it's sort of a broader kind of political economic phenomenon that reaches up to basically the essence of law and international law. And the sense is that, what Israel does vis-a-vis the Palestinian community, it's essentially allowed, because by allowing it, it allows other governments to sort of act in a similar manner. If they do not censure Israel, if the U.S. vetoes resolutions against Israel, it sort of, I think, for those officials, it sort of lends them the illusion, the fiction, that they are allowed to sort of act in the same way, and that if they start to criticize Israel, it will sort of reflect that criticism upon themselves. And I think it's a very powerful issue that sort of goes to the core of politics, of international politics, and sort of kind of explains, even on a human level, how people sort of can rationalize, the guy in the State Department or in the embassy or this or that, how they're sort of indoctrinated into the sense of accepting what's going on because they're essentially taught not to view it in a sort of macro level and see the patterns going on and see how countries will certainly enable or allow other countries to violate people's rights to commit genocide as they did in Gaza this year because it reflects their own policies, their own interests, their own selfish interests. And so it's a sort of cycle of international enablement of war, of conflict, of profiting off conflict. Israel is very much a war-profiting economy. Their weapons and technology industry is probably one of the most important ones they have. So I think it's key to look at it, on a lot of different levels, like Google Maps. You can scroll out, you can scroll in. And so at every level, there's sort of, dynamics and ways to look at it and to challenge it. Because, all the international laws in the world aren't going to matter. What matters is what people do, what decisions they make. And if they feel they're above the law, they'll act that way until the public, we, essentially refuse to accept that. And essentially, like the people who blockade on the highway, literally step out and stand in their way and say, no, that's not how human beings should act. There's a different way, a better way that you can have a human community without killing and destroying each other. So that's my little speech. So thank you.
Just in appreciation for all the hard work that Brian did, the Canada-Palestine Association presents him with this beautiful painting. It's by a late Palestinian painter based in Toronto who died just last year. His name is Ibrahim Shalabi. So we present this to Brian. Yeah, thank you, Brian, and you are really an inspiration to all of us. And I think this is the way to do it, really. If you want to support, really go there and see with your own eyes the Israeli brutality, the Israeli apartheid, the Israeli war crimes, and the Israeli ethnic cleansing that's taking place on a daily basis. Just, I want to recognize that we are here on unceded Coast Salish territory. And really, we appreciate them hosting us. This feather is presented to us by them. And we consider it really, as I say many times in our meetings, this is our visa and our passport to this land. We don't recognize the official visa and the official passport, which is really hard to get anyway. But so we recognize that, and we thank them for hosting us on their unceded Coast Salish territory. This, by the way, was presented to us, to the Canada-Palestine Association and to the Palestinian community by the native, the indigenous women elders at the Down East Side Women's Center in here, just in Vancouver here. So having said that, I think, Canada-Palestine Association also decided that all the proceeds from this meeting, and we encourage people really to donate if they can afford it. We thank them for the donation, for the admission, for the at the door. But we really appreciate it if they can donate more on their way out. There is a basket. We're not gonna send it around. If people can afford it, they could really donate that. And all the proceeds from this meeting is we're gonna split it two ways. One to Rachel Corey Foundation, that's doing really very good work, whether in Olympia or back in Rafah and in Gaza. Half of it will go to the Rachel Corrie Foundation, and the other half will go to the international solidarity movement back home in Palestine, because they need all the support we can give them. And we make sure that this money will go directly to them, and half of the other half will go to the Rachel Corrie Foundation. So I urge you to be generous in your way out if you can afford it, because this is the kind of work we need really at this point of time. Brian, I have really, I'm not going to disappoint you, I have a concrete suggestion for our audience how to help us in the BDS movement, but I'll talk about it after Craig and Cindy will speak.